Whenever a new video game platform launches, a slew of titles release to provide an additional marketing draw, as well as give the early adopters something to chew on before the higher profile releases come out a year or two later. The most recent consoles to launch, the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, have a fairly standard set of previous generation games, as well as one or two new titles if fancier visuals alone weren't enough to drive sales. This is typical for consoles with backward compatibility, but in the past, when hardware was drastically changing or new players were entering the industry, games consoles couldn't launch with a small bundle of the previous console's libraries. New games would need to be developed, and while they were serviceable at the time, as soon as something groundbreaking was released, those launch titles would fade away. Nobody thinks about Bloodwake or Super Thunderblade anymore, but those were vitally important to the success of their host systems. Now, while Sega and Microsoft were essentially releasing single or double A titles at launch, Nintendo weren't holding back. Every new system came with a highly anticipated sequel, or a new IP that would break the mold and build a legacy for itself right away. Super Mario Bros., Duck Hunt, Excitebike, Mario 64, Luigi's Mansion, Super Monkey Ball, Red Steel, Twilight Princess, Breath of the Wild. Quality games, one after another, but none of it compares to the Super Nintendo launch selection. Gradius 3 and Super R-Type for the shooter fans. SimCity for those with a passion for management. The king of 2D platformers, Super Mario World. And another game that was pushing the limits of home video games at the console's launch. F-Zero looked at the racing game arcade machines and managed to capture that experience on a 16-bit cartridge for the public at home. While many enjoyed the racing games on the NES, it is no question that the limited camera angles made racing at high speed difficult, as turns and obstacles would suddenly appear on screen. An over-the-roof angle was already the preferred view to race from, so capturing that experience was a primary objective for F-Zero's development. And with the Super Nintendo's new Mode 7 function, F-Zero delivered breakneck speeds that could be controlled like no other console game at the time. While the Super Nintendo is not capable of processing 3D environments, the backgrounds can be easily manipulated to spoof the idea that the player is moving in 3D. The bubbles on the edge of the track are pivotal in delivering this experience. As the player accelerates faster and faster, their point of reference, the bubbles, fly by quicker and quicker until they become a single blurred line. Zooming past other vehicles heightens the sense of speed, and the way the player's vehicle flies around uncontrollably when turning without slowing down means that the speed is tangible and directly impacts the play experience. Space Harrier was close, but its home console versions don't play anywhere near as smoothly as F-Zero. The bulk of F-Zero's animation is clearly in the backgrounds. The entire experience hinges on the backgrounds moving smoothly and appropriately, with all of the variables lining up cleanly. They are the star of the show, but the vehicles are also fantastic sprites, with a high number of viewable angles to show the vehicle from. There are 13 turnaround sprites for each vehicle at 3 ranges, as well as a slightly smaller quantity of turnarounds for 4 more ranges. Turning wings move, there are new angled frames for rolling turns, and driver silhouettes for the blue Falcon, since the driver is somewhat visible from behind. The palette for each vehicle is basic, but necessarily so, in order to assist in distinguishing each racer from the track and the horizons. Mute City looks fantastic, and the different color variations make the 3 tracks based there visually distinct from each other. Deathwind and Whiteland are also striking settings, and Big Blue and Sand Ocean use an excellent fade effect to create the illusion that the horizons are enormous. Red Canyon is a dreamy landscape too, but difficult to really appreciate when the player's eyes are glued onto the race. At the blazing speeds the vehicles move, if the player were inattentive, they would soon find themselves bouncing from track boundaries, spinning away into the rough terrain, or exploding due to power loss. Only the purple vehicle is really capable of having the accelerator held down at all times, and even that vehicle must be cognizant when approaching hairpin turns. When presented with these obstacles on the track, the player has a few options in order to maneuver their vehicle in the most efficient way. Holding the accelerator when turning will often cause the vehicle to lose traction and careen into the nearest barrier. Releasing the accelerator can often be effective enough, as F-Zero's vehicles lose momentum rapidly, making turning tightly attainable. The player may also choose to increase this momentum loss by braking, although I found it rarely useful. The L and R buttons engage a rolling turn, rotating the vehicle on the X-axis and grinding their flanks on the track. These turns, combined with releasing the accelerator, should get the player around any turn that they are faced with. Finally, there are a few ramps within the game, and when the player is launched from these, they are able to fully control their vehicle as normal, as well as lift the vehicle's nose to gain further airtime. This allows the player to cut corners following the ramps, but is only ever necessary on a single track. Tracks are a key function for any racing game, and F-Zero offers a roster of 15 tracks within 3 leagues. Each race is ran for around 3 minutes, with Fire Field being the longest at a monster 5 minutes. These track layouts are surprisingly varied, and other than the 2 Deathwind tracks, offer an interesting challenge in determining which is the most effective line to take when attempting to beat previous records. Unfortunately, only 7 tracks are available to be played in time trial mode. If the player would like to make attempts at improving their records on later tracks, they have to play through an entire league in order to get a single attempt in. Moreover, while other races being present on the tracks is perfectly logical, F-Zero has non-participant NPC vehicles on the track, acting as obstacles that serve as nothing more than annoyances. Dodging around a slow-moving vehicle that isn't even racing only makes getting the optimal route through a track a random occurrence, instead of the challenge being a twitchy, instinctual, reactable obstacle course. The other races aren't simulated when behind the player. Instead, based on the selected difficulty, the other races will appear behind the player if they don't perform to a standard. It is impossible to build an insurmountable lead through perfect driving, which makes a single blemish on an impeccable run suddenly become a pit of repeated harassment. Tracking records for fastest laps and fastest races are absolutely the most fun part of playing F-Zero, and it would have been marvelous if it was possible to turn off NPCs and races on every track. F-Zero is the genesis of home console racing games, and the game's legacy is surprisingly robust. It took a primitive hardware, a timeless concept, and catapulted the pair into the future. Racing game fans will already be deeply familiar with the gameplay style F-Zero offers, as the skeleton of many modern racers are constructed in almost the exact same way. While the series only features 3 home console titles, its impact on the entire genre has been felt ever since its introduction, and Captain Falcon has been appropriately memorialized since the conclusion of F-Zero's development. If Nintendo aren't willing to make new entries for the series, then that is deeply disappointing. But the first game still holds up after all these years, and is positively worth playing. While F-Zero is rudimentary nowadays, video gaming's history extends farther back. Some of those older titles are eternal despite their archaic nature and limited resources. But sometimes, a limited artist can produce the most spectacular work.